Okay, so this is the first level of Combat Mission Shock Force. The campaign name is called Task Force Thunder, and it features the modern U.S. Army going to war with the Syrian army. The U.S. attacks from the east along the Iraq border and goes down the main route headed to the Syrian city of Hims, which is known as Route Lightning. In the first mission, which I'm about to play, Task Force Thunder makes its breakthrough attack and is ordered to penetrate the Syrian defenses along the road, which is behind a fortified berm, and then create a pocket for the rest of the American force to push through. It's a night mission, and it's comprised of an attack on an active and fully manned Syrian base. The base is protected by extensive trench systems, about 24 tanks, half of which are static and are simply basically turrets, but they also have a mobile reserve of tanks. There are several companies of infantry and also pillboxes and other strong points where the enemy can fire from. Starting off, you can notice that I have a company of mechanized infantry, I have a platoon of armor, and I also have a platoon of 105mm strikers, and of course the company's command element and forward observers. The area across from where I'm starting is actually a fortified berm, so I can't traverse that with vehicles, although it can be traversed by infantry. The way that it was recommended that I attack this position in the briefing was to do a two-sided pincer movement and attack from both sides. I decided not to do that because I would not be able to utilize my vehicles on the right flank, as they'd have to go around the berm, and I don't think that my infantry would fare very well against tanks without tank support themselves. So I'm just doing an overview of the trenches right now and the defenses. The fortified compound that the base is in has 4 towers that are fully fortified blockhouses. Each one contains an infantry platoon. Starting off, I put the forward observers up on the berm so they can have a clear view of the right flank. So I'll be able to track enemy motion, at least. And then I take the command element, the company command element, and I put them in the middle of the berm. And well, I guess I don't do that right now. I guess I'll do that in a couple of moments, actually. So I decide that the way that the vehicles are arrayed in the beginning is not effective for what I want to accomplish, because there's a very narrow passageway in which the vehicles can pass through. So rather than have them in this horizontal attack pattern, I create a line formation. This way they can quickly file through the gap in the berm, rather than bunch up in the entranceway and get slaughtered. So right now I'm just putting all the vehicles in a line so they can quickly deploy. Now I think I move the command element to the berm, if memory serves. Nope, I actually do my beginning movement orders. So we're going to quickly race to the berm with the tanks. Get past the initial gap that you have to pass through in order to get past the berm. And set up the defensive positions and overwatch positions on the left flank. The tanks will rush in, and from behind them, moving at slow speed, will be the rest of the mechanized forces. This way, in the event of heavy enemy resistance, they can be halted before they actually get through the gap and be exposed to fire. I'm expecting to have heavy enemy contact as soon as I pass through the gap in the berm. And the last elements that are in this attack spearhead are the 105mm strikers. They're going to be put in reserve in the rear, and I hope to put them in a safe position. This way they're not exposed to enemy fire directly. They'll be used to attack the buildings in the compounds. Now the command element is ordered onto the berm to get vision of the central complex and also the central front. I unpause the game and begin motion. So as soon as the forward observers get up on this hill, they have an almost clear line of sight on the entire right flank. I tell them to hide so they don't give away their position and open fire on any enemy forces. I consider that position for the forward observers to be ideal because it's basically the same as having a helicopter in the sky. Since it is a clear line of sight, it allows me to know exactly what the enemy is doing on that flank. There are approximately 6 tanks on that flank. And on the left flank so far, there's 2 heavy machine gun positions. As soon as I clear that gap, I prepare to engage the tanks. The tanks come under heavy fire, but they managed to get the better of the exchanges. We're now into the enemy's defenses. I leave a few tanks in the rear to provide cover for the approaching strikers. One tank I leave almost blocking the gap. This way he has a clear line of sight of any tanks that are coming around from the right flank. they would quickly make short work of my strikers, which are lightly armored. So I want to make sure that that flank is protected, even at the risk of hindering mobility. So we can see on this trench here there is a bunker which was abandoned when the tanks began to open fire. There's also some assorted infantry elements out in the open that are being pinned by our tanks. So the mechanized forces are finally arriving. Perfect timing, not too soon, so they weren't exposed to the initial fires from the enemy tanks. There's some infantry maneuvering on the left, but they're mostly pinned. In this level, the advantage that the U.S. has in optics really, becomes obvious. Because I can see the enemy and they can't really see me. I'm firing upon them and they're just firing blindly back and not really having any effect. Taking some fire from the heavy machine gun on the right flank. I move these tanks forward in preparation for an assault on the trenches. Then I attempt to suppress the tanks that are firing upon us. I mean the machine guns. Those tanks are taking some RPG hits, but haven't been really injured that badly. Now I move up the mechanized elements to prepare for a quick assault on the trenches. One tank on the right got a little too close. He was within killing range of the RPGs. Create a wall of smoke and dismount. That heavy machine gun that's firing at me from that blockhouse in the edge of the screen on the right, that is the sort of target that our 105s are, the best at eliminating. So it's come over to the comms that additional artillery assets have been made available. At the beginning I only had light mortars, and now they unlock some 155mm howitzers. The reason for the initial restriction in artillery was that it was being used for counter battery operations, in other words suppressing the enemy artillery. And now as the enemy batteries have been effectively countered, artillery assets are being freed up to me. So right now, I was trying to figure out how I was going to attack this trench. It looked pretty well defended. So I decided instead of attacking right away, I'll soften it up with some artillery. I call in howitzers on the right, and I call in mortars on the left. The reason for that is, if I were to call in howitzers on the left, it would be danger close. In other words, I'd be endangering my forces. because they're only about 300 meters away from the enemy target, and howitzers of that size can be deadly, you know, for up to 300 meters from an initial blast. So I'm just getting my troops in position, and I'm preparing to call in the mortars. I also set it up so we have some fire suppression on the enemy line. At this exact moment, I can't call in mortars using the command element from company command element because the smoke is obstructing their view. So I move forward some of the fire teams to provide some cover so they can actually get in a position to call in the artillery.
Shot, over. Shot, out. Flash, over.
Now they should be able to.
Shot, over. Shot, out. Requesting fire mission, over. Roger, fire mission request, out. Flash, over.
So after this artillery finishes dropping and we soften up the enemy defense, then we'll commence the assault in the trenches.
Shot, over. Out. Shot,
Those are the first howitzer shells coming in on the right.
Flash, over. Flash out. Flash, over. Shot, over. Shot, out. Fire for effect, over. Fire for effect, out.
Right now I'm just setting up suppression fire on the trenches, this way I don't take any casualties.
Fire for effect, over. Roger. Fire for effect.
Now it's time to finally bring up the 105s. I'm taking some fire from those buildings. And even though that the heat rounds from the Abrams tanks are pretty effective at taking out infantry, they don't really compare to the power of the 105mm HE rounds. Assault now begins on the trenches.
End of mission. Out.
So the guardhouse on the top left corner of the compound actually blew a huge hole in it with the Abrams, and eventually I actually blow the top off where the enemy machine gun crew was. So the assault is in action here on here in the trenches, and then I realized that the enemy has a tank parked directly behind the trench. So I rushed my Abrams forward in order to take out that tank. Because the AT weapons on those attacking squads are not enough. That was a gamble, but I think I would have taken some pretty heavy casualties if I would have let that tank do damage. So my squad's made it across the field. They have some casualties, but not too heavy. And I get them safely in the trenches, and then they spread out and assault the other sides. Whenever the Syrians attempt to defend themselves, they come under fire from friendly forces. They're effectively pinned in the trenches. Taking fire from the towers inside the compound though, so I move forward the 105s to destroy the towers. The assault on the right side of the trench is basically at a standstill, so I send in another fire team. And I also increase suppression fire, including some fire from the 105mm strikers. So whenever an enemy machine gun position reveals itself, I return fire with the mobile howitzers. Also bombard the compounds with artillery called in by the spotters on the berm.
Squad fire, over.
So I destroyed 3 out of the 4 guard towers. The one on the edge facing us appears to be unoccupied. So Syrian forces are attempting to retreat out of the trench, and they're being cut down by heavy machine gun fire. And the right side is finally being captured.
Fire mission out.
So I notice here on the right flank, thanks to my forward observers, that there's enemy armor converging on my position. Luckily, I already have the tank set up to absorb any potential assault. I have ones in the rear that are facing that exact direction, and basically have a chain, an Overwatch chain. That one attempted to attack through a gap in the fortified wall, and he's taken out.
Shot, over. Shot, out. Flash, over. Flash. Shot, over. Shot, out. Flash out. Fire for effect, over. Roger, fire for effect.
So, a second platoon has arrived. Another mechanized platoon. The second platoon of strikers. I currently keep them in reserve until this initial attack has been stabilized and the trenches are mine, and then I move them forward to assist in the assault on the actual complex itself. At this point, I considered leaving one of the fire teams from the second company. I considered leaving one of them on the berm with javelins, which are anti-tank guided missiles, to help in taking out some of the tanks, but I changed my mind in the middle of deploying them and put them back in the striker. So now we have 3 tanks moving in from the right flank to come and relieve the left flank. I'm just double checking here to make sure that my tanks are in position to ambush them as they come around the complex corners. I'm a little worried about the furthest extent of my left flank. I'm not sure if the tank there will have a field of fire. The rest of the company into the trench and prepare to take out the last section of the trench on the right side. And a tank comes around the corner and is immediately neutralized.
Request fire mission, over.
using the artillery to my advantage to minimize casualties that I might take. I'm going to pulverize this section of trench here on the right. And also perhaps hit some tanks. So this tank here is preparing to fire on the trench. And my tank is not in position to hit it. So I actually have to move my tank forward in order to effectively destroy that vehicle.
Roger, fire mission request. Out. Shot, over. Shot, out. Flash, over. Flash, out. Fire for effect, fire for effect.
There's also a few tanks inside the compound.
End of mission, out.
Here I use the 105mm strikers to blow a hole in the fortified wall of the compound. This way I can grant my tanks line of sight on the enemy tanks that are in the interior. I move up my first company strikers to provide suppression support, the inevitable assault on the other side of the trench. Move up the second company to help assist in the assault.
Out. Fire mission over.
same thing here. I blow the wall open this way I can fire upon these tanks before they gain the initiative.
Fire machine out. Shot. Over. Shot. Out.
So we're now taking some fire from
Flash. Over.
enemy
Flash. Out.
enemy squads that are actually inside the base area.
Shot. Over.
There's 2 or 3 squads in this building on the right, and there's about a company-sized enemy force in the barracks on the left. One of my primary objectives is to capture those barracks.
Shot. Over. Shot. Out.
So I establish the first company as a base of fire,
Flash. Over.
and then I move in the second company to assault the actual complex.
Fire for effect. Over. Fire for effect. Out.
This artillery that's coming down is danger close. It has the potential of doing blue-on-blue damage, but I take the risk.
Flash. Out. Fire for effect. Roger. Over. Fire for effect.
Using the 105 to flush out enemy infantry squads. I was amazed that any enemy force survived this totally brutal artillery barrage. It's unending. And unfortunately, this is the only mission where you ever get this much artillery assets. The other missions are much more limited, and you rarely get 155mm howitzer support. So I noticed that one of the fire teams of the second company was lagging behind at the beginning. And it turns out that they were actually bugged. There was a bug and they would not move. So I'm just punching up on my infantry here for the assaults on the actual complex. This presents a pretty big risk for blue-on-blue fire, friendly fire incidents. But it's a risk that I'll have to take. Some enemy forward observers in the building on the right.
Fire mission over.
They open fire on my approaching squads and are immediately open fire on themselves. few of my 105 strikers are actually out of ammo.
Request fire. Out.
Just firing the last shells here. After that, all they'll have is a 50 caliber machine gun.
Shot. Over. Shot.
So we're taking some sporadic light arms fire from enemy infantry squads located in the barracks.
Request fire mission out. Splash out.
But it's not enough to actually slow down or impede my assaults. And they're getting bombarded by artillery the entire time.
Shot. Over. Shot out. Flash over. Flash out. Flash over. Shot over. Shot out. Shot over. Shot out.
Move forward. Most of the vehicles to provide cover for the assault that's bound to occur in a few moments.
Fire for effect. Over. Roger. Shot. Fire for effect. Shot out. Flash. Over. Flash out. Fire for effect. Over. Roger. Fire for effect.
The last of the artillery is falling now, and after it's done, the assault will commence. Those rounds that are landing right now are very close to my position. Dangerously close. The kill radius on a round of that size and the fragmentation is huge. That being said, I had surprisingly low casualties for the initial assault on the trenches. The enemy had at least a company level strength there, if not more. And they were fully entrenched, and they had tanks to support them as well. So that being said, the assault was pretty successful. So here's this bugged squad that I was talking about. Half the squad is outside of the vehicle and can't be moved, and the other half is inside the vehicle and I can't dismount them. After playing with this for a couple of minutes, I finally managed to get it to work. By this point, the squad is going to miss the assault on the actual compound, so I just dismount them and send them up on the berm to take out some tanks. There is still one or two mobile tanks. The rest of the tanks on the right flank are static, meaning that they're completely immobile and the enemy is just using them as a stationary turret. So the time has actually changed to day. We've been fighting for that long. I begin to move my forces into position for the assault. I begin by establishing a base of fire at this guardhouse on the left. Rush 2 fire teams into there, and then I also position other fire teams behind the wall and the gap that I created on the right.
End of mission. Out.
That explosion was from the fire team I put up on the berm. They took out the tank that was behind the wall. So as soon as my assault begins, I noticed that there were survivors to that massive artillery attack. There's still about a company of infantry in the barracks area, and a half a company of infantry in this white building on the right. From the guardhouse here, directly in front of us, my forces are laying down a heavy stream of fire. That'll provide cover for the other teams that advance into the compound. Also have two M240 heavy machine gun teams in the little gap on the right that are suppressing the command elements in the white building. While I wasn't looking, that fire team on the Berm managed to take out 3 tanks. All of the enemy's remaining tank force all except the one tank that I just destroyed right there. So I'm rushing my teams across the open field to secure the barracks. They're coming under fire, but the fire is being returned. I managed to capture 2 out of the 3 barracks, and I'm moving a fire team to capture the last one. We have a pretty good firefight going on in the courtyard here. Teams that have already arrived at the barracks on the left side are providing cover for the teams that are approaching across the open ground. Now I move some of the vehicles into the compound to help suppress this white building on the right. I begin to assault the white building. clearing the auxiliary buildings in the barracks area, run into the remnants of a Syrian infantry company lying in wait in the ruins of one of the guard towers. And the Syrian army surrenders before I can finish clearing the rest of the complex. I hope you enjoyed. This is my favorite combat mission Shock Force level.